In April 2025, Marie Osmond stopped using social media, although not for the anticipated reason. For more than a year, the 65-year-old celebrity has been subjected to harsh criticism over her appearance. After comparing images from the 1970s and 2024, she was accused of being a fraud. She denied major surgery, but she did admit to some treatments. Experts, however, noted distinct modifications that were inexplicable. How did Marie's face turn out? Has grown to be one of the greatest mysteries in Hollywood. Nobody could have predicted the stunning reality of her metamorphosis. On October 13, 1959, Marie Osmond was born in Ogden, Utah. She was the family's lone daughter and the eighth of 9 children. However, her parents, George and Olive, were already feeling overburdened before she was born. Both of their sons were born. Despite the doctor's advice not to have any more children, George and Olive felt that God intended them to. The risk was enormous. They lacked the funds to care for additional children with disabilities. It seemed miraculous when Marie was born healthy and with excellent hearing. She had normal hearing, as did the 5 younger boys who came after her. Her parents interpreted it as evidence that they had made the correct decision. The financial burden of having 2 deaf sons, however, never really went away. Marie's early years were very different from those of a typical child. Her father was an Army veteran who operated their house more like a military installation. Her days were occupied with rigorous regulations and music practices by the time she was just 3 years old. They had to react like soldiers when her brother woke them up in the morning by playing the bugle. They had to say, "Yes, sir," or "Thank you, sir," during meals. They were also disciplined if they misbehaved. There was no outdoor play, no relaxation, and no true childhood. Since all Marie had ever known was practice, scripts, and more practice, she assumed that every family did this. Marie was learning Swedish songs for European tours while other children were learning to color. Her entire existence revolved around performance. The family was also having a lot of financial difficulties. Things grew so bad that they had to mortgage their farm and move to Los Angeles with no savings left in 1963, when Marie was only 5 years old. Her father's medical bills and failed businesses had cost him almost $25,000. Today, that would be worth more than $200,000. Marie had to start performing in order to support them because they were broke and occasionally spent the night in their car. She enjoyed singing, but she didn't do it. They wouldn't eat if she didn't sing, so she did. It's difficult to envision a young girl being under that much pressure. Even before learning to read, she would later claim that she felt accountable for her entire family. In February 1964, she got her first significant break. When she made her appearance on The Andy Williams Show, she was only 4 years old. Behind the scenes, it was serious business, but most people found it cute. Marie was being evaluated to determine if she could be included to her boy's 5-year contract, which was valued at about $50,000. In between rehearsals, she had to attend school classes, work 18-hour days, and remember scripts that she couldn't even read. When she was just 4 years old, producers even made remarks about her weight. It was the start of her lifelong battle with body image. It was not a happy dream as a child, it was a job. And Marie wasn't being treated like a child, but rather like a product. She was a regular on the show by 1967. Now that her entire family was participating in the act, things began to shift. They began touring the world after landing a record deal with MGM. Donnie, Marie, and their younger brother Jimmy traveled in small quarters and occasionally slept in the storage areas of the trailer. Marie was already managing money after performances and keeping track of ticket sales with her mother before she was even 10 years old. Before most children were permitted to cross the street by themselves, she had adult duties. The Osmonds' fame then skyrocketed in 1971. After their song One Bad Apple became a #1 hit, they found themselves suddenly wealthy. They purchased houses in California and Utah. Donnie even installed electronics in their home to create a secret area where his bed moved like it was in a spy film. However, not everything was joy. Their new spiritual CD failed in 1973, and the older brothers decided to play rock music instead. With gentle tunes like Puppy Love, Donnie rose to fame, and Marie was mostly excluded from the group's triumph. She was simply regarded as the girl in a male-dominated home. She experienced that sense of exclusion for years. In August 1973, Marie's life took a drastic turn. Paper Roses, the first solo song she recorded, became an enormous smash. It was her 14th birthday. The song peaked at #2 in the UK, #5 on the Billboard Hot 100, and #1 on the country charts. More than 500,000 copies of her CDs were sold. Though it had a cost, it was a dream come true. She was encouraged to appear older than she actually was by her record label. They selected music that sounded more appropriate for adults than for adolescent girls. She was forced into styles she didn't want by music producers. Although Marie was a huge fan of country music, they recorded tunes that would appeal to her older audience. She was already being dragged away from her own voice at the age of 14. Then came 1974, the year that almost brought everything to an end. In order to promote her second album, In My Little Corner of the World, Marie had been performing constantly. Her voice began to falter. The doctors were taken aback. Even though she was just 15, years of stress were causing damage to her vocal cords that is often seen in adults. The family went into a panic when she had to cancel events. Without her voice, Marie's millions of dollars in revenue for the Osmond brand might have been lost. She can hardly sing in the footage from that era, and she tries not to cry while performing. Despite her obvious exhaustion, the machine continued to run around her. She released Who's Sorry Now, her third album, in 1975. It was different, less country, more pop. Her brothers disapproved of Marie's desire to experiment with other styles. Her family blamed her for altering the recipe, and the album didn't do as well. Even though she was just 16, she had to struggle to be allowed to select her own music. Although her siblings and managers believed she was damaging the business, Marie was just interested in developing. She experienced the strain for years since it was so intense. She then said that she felt forced to decide between becoming her own artist and remaining loyal to her family. She embarked on a Japanese tour in 1975. It was among the most significant events of her career. As if it were Beatlemania, fans fainted and yelled. To navigate the crowds, she needed police escorts. Behind the scenes, however, Marie was in disarray. She performed in more than 200 performances annually. Even for adults, such a schedule is cruel. It was intolerable for a teenager. She continued to strive to be a girl while working nonstop, traveling between nations, making records, and performing on television. Since there were no genuine child labor rules in the entertainment industry at the time, nobody bothered to check on her. They simply continued. The money was too good. Marie Osmond had outlived most individuals twice her age by the time she was 16. She had been a public personality, a performer, a supplier, and a corporate asset. Beneath all the celebrity, however, was a girl who was never allowed to experience childhood. Something that had never been seen on television before occurred in January 1976. Donny Osmond and his sister Marie, both teenagers, were given the opportunity to perform in their own variety show. Marie was only 16 and Donny was 18. After noticing their charisma during a guest appearance, ABC's president awarded them a whole show. On January 23, 1976, around 14 million people watched it. They continued to watch week after week after week. Every program concluded with balloons dropping from the ceiling while Donny and Marie performed rock and country respectively. May tomorrow be a lovely day. They were the world's youngest hosts, and somehow made it through a period when variety programs were already going extinct. However, there was something more darker hidden beneath all of that color and song. The suffering Marie was concealing behind her smile was invisible to others. Millions observed a happy adolescent who was working 18 hours a day and getting very little sleep. She still needed a tutor to help her study for school before going home to do her chores. She was informed she was too fat by producers. She was only 103 pounds, and they threatened to cancel the concert unless she lost another 10 pounds. Marie began to go hungry. She weighed 93 pounds. She was unable to remain awake. She began to perceive her body in fictitious ways. They also dubbed her a fat pig and pulled her into parking lots. For decades, she was affected by the harm this created. The pressure continued to rise despite her best efforts to push through it. Her album, This Is the Way That I Feel, was published in 1977. It didn't sell well, though. She got into arguments with her family and the producers because she wanted more influence over her songs. The Osmonds assumed complete control of the show by the end of 1977, and they relocated the production from Los Angeles to Utah. Marie attempted to alter the manner of the presentation. She substituted disco-themed performances for the older music because she wanted it to feel more contemporary. The changes were disliked by several fans. The traditional rock and country elements that gave the performance its unique flavor were overlooked by others. But in a world that was always telling her what to do, she was attempting to find her voice. 1978 was a bad year. On set, Marie passed out. Her body had surrendered. She was tired and dehydrated. Her group attempted to conceal it. They ensured that no one outside the studio knew and kept the journalists at bay. They could not jeopardize the clean image of the show. However, Marie was disintegrating. Nevertheless, she appeared. She gave a performance. She grinned, because she felt she needed to continue for her followers and her family. Despite receiving Emmy nominations in 1978, including one for the song Leading Lady, the show's ratings were declining. The network renamed the program The Osmond Family Show and shifted it to Sundays in 1979. It was unsuccessful. Donnie got married about the time the show was terminated in May. Many of his young female fans stopped watching as a result. It was the end of the fairy tale. However, it was more than just a change of career for Marie. The years of starvation and condemnation had caused serious damage. She became prone to binge eating, followed by days of fasting. Her metabolism never got back to normal. She was so horrified that she couldn't even look in the mirror. She made her acting debut in The Gift of Love, a Christmas television film, in 1978. She portrayed a wealthy orphan who develops feelings for a Swiss immigrant. Her fiancé was portrayed by James Woods. She didn't have enough depth for serious acting, according to reviewers, and the film didn't do well. She resumed her career in music and television, but her ambition to become a serious actress began to fade. She then made an attempt at Broadway in 1982. In a revival of The Sound of Music, she portrayed Maria, although the critiques were harsh. She was ripped apart by critics. The performance concluded early. She needed time away from the spotlight to recuperate. She was plagued by that failure for years. She didn't get much recognition until 1994 when she went back on tour in the role. She made her Broadway debut in The King and I in 1997. Although she lacked emotion, critics praised her voice for being robust. It was still a victory. It provided her with something she had long been lacking. Marie had a great resurgence in country music in 1985. After its July release, her album There's No Stopping Your Heart became an immediate hit. In both the US and Canada, her duet with Dan Seals, Meet Me in Montana, peaked at #1. Additionally, the title track hit a solo #1. Since Paper Roses in 1973, it was her first solo chart topper. She started traveling after relocating her family to Nashville. She gave more than 300 performances annually. She played wherever they took her, even after trekking through cow pastures and having to scrape mud off her shoes. However, the effort paid off. It was a fresh start. She began something quite different in 1986. On QVC, she started creating and marketing porcelain dolls. It was more than a side project. Everything was under her control. Every design was her own creation. There were a lot of dolls sold. Within 15 minutes, one of them, which was modeled after her own mother, sold 3 million units. She created more than 500 dolls over the years. All of the money poured in. She made almost $50 million from it as it grew into a full-fledged commercial empire. She demonstrated that she had true business acumen, despite the claims that she was only using her reputation to boost her income. Her second album, All in Love, was released in 1988. It was released in July after being recorded in March. Despite having a duet with Paul Davis and powerful vocals, it was a failure. The singles didn't do well in the charts. The album was overshadowed by tabloid stories about her first divorce. Neither did her 1989 follow-up release. Her popularity in country music had peaked. She began doing more shows in Las Vegas in the late 1990s, but it wasn't until 2008 when something extraordinary occurred once more. She started a residency at the Flamingo Hotel with Donnie. It operated for 11 years, but no one anticipated it would endure. By the time it concluded in November 2019, they had performed 1230 times. In the history of Vegas, it became the longest-running singing duo act. In addition to a portion of the ticket sales, they were each making over $1 million annually at one point. The Flamingo even changed the name of its theater to honor them. The last night was poignant. The audience joined in their tears as they sang their well-known farewell song. She accomplished something courageous in 2001. She wrote a book on her battle with postpartum depression titled Behind the Smile. Her 7th child had just been born and thought she was vanishing. She experienced physical aches, depressing thoughts, and panic attacks. She drove out one evening without informing anyone where she was, leaving her children behind. Her spouse persuaded her to rest at a motel. Thousands of individuals wrote to her, describing their own suffering after she discussed it on Oprah. The book sparked a national dialogue regarding postpartum depression. She made it acceptable to discuss something that nobody wanted to acknowledge. At the age of 48, she participated in Dancing with the Stars in 2007. Although she performed fairly well, placing 3rd, her live fainting on TV is what most people remember. It took place immediately following a dance. The screen became black as she fell. She said, "Oh crap." As soon as she woke up, on live TV, I passed out. She then inquired about her scores. Millions of people saw her as even more human after that moment. She started working with Nutrisystem in the same year. She became their ambassador for almost 10 years after losing 50 pounds. She made millions from the agreement. She used it to candidly discuss her weight issues, which had plagued her since she was 14 years old. She claimed that the treatment made her body love her in return. Losing weight was not the only goal. It has to do with recovery. She became a co-host of the chat show The Chat in 2019. She talked about very intimate experiences, such as how years of back problems led her to decide to get breast reduction surgery. She claimed that when she portrayed Maria in The Sound of Music, her breasts were the only topic of conversation. After just one season, she exited the show in 2020. After raising 8 children, she and her husband were finally alone for the first time since 1982. Marie Osmond believed that a lovely eternity was about to begin as she was married for the first time in 1982. She married basketball player Stephen Craig in front of 4,000 guests at a Mormon temple when she was barely 22 years old. They welcomed their son, Stephen James Craig, into the world in April 1983. However, things began to fall apart more quickly than anyone had anticipated. The couple's marriage ended in October 1985. Marie said there had been mental mistreatment and sought for divorce. It was considerably more difficult behind the scenes. She was attempting to juggle her roles as a well-known entertainer and a new mother. The pressure was tremendous. According to friends, Stephen was unable to cope with the constant attention that accompanied Marie's celebrity. The subtle tie that will eventually reunite them after many years would be their son. Marie remarried in 1986, this time to Brian Blossel, a music producer. They spent 21 years together. 5 of their 7 children were adopted and 2 were biological. On the outside, it appeared to be a large, happy family, but on the inside, things were very bleak. Following the birth of her son Matthew in July 1999, Marie experienced a terrifying depressive episode. She felt completely different. Her thoughts would race, her body would tremble, and she genuinely thought her kids would be better off without her. She gave the kid a credit card, left the child with a babysitter, and drove off along the California coast one day without knowing where she was heading. She was gone for 3 days. Her spouse had to use the phone to find her. Scared and shattered, she landed up in a motel. She used Zoloft for 5 years after doctors prescribed it to her, but she detested how it made her feel completely depressed. No joy but no sorrow either. On February 26, 2010, she experienced the most agonizing anguish of her life. Michael, her 18-year-old adopted son, leaped from his Los Angeles apartment complex. He had been suffering from depression for a while, particularly following the 2007 divorce of Marie and Brian. He had tried treatment while in his first year of fashion school, but he felt totally isolated. He told Marie, "I have no friends," just a few days before he passed away. She was plagued by those words. She was too familiar with that sensation. Brian, his father, did not attend his funeral. Before he died, Michael had changed his last name from Blossel to Brian since his siblings didn't want him there. Then an astonishing event occurred. Marie remarried Stephen Craig, her first husband, on May 4th, 2011, precisely 29 years after their initial marriage. It seemed like a complete circle. The fact that Marie discovered her 1982 wedding gown concealed in an old box in her garage 5 days prior to the marriage added to the magic. Although she had previously purchased a new dress, it didn't feel appropriate, nor was the date she picked arbitrary. Olive, her mother, and her late son Michael were both born on May 4. Marie expressed her desire for both of them to be present in spirit. Before the wedding, she and Stephen had been having a covert relationship for 2 years in case things didn't work out again. They had a little reception at home after getting married in a Mormon temple in Las Vegas in a discreet ceremony. She used it as a means of recovery. It was not in 2001 that she had the worst day of her despair. It took place shortly after Matthew's birth in 1999. Her age was 40. She was unable to get out of bed or raise her arms because her body was so overloaded. With the belief that she would never return, she drove away from her family for 3 days. According to doctors, it was severe stress. Her 2001 work, Behind the Smile, was inspired by that traumatic event, where she talked candidly about how lost she felt and her suicidal thoughts. When Marie stood by her LGBT daughter Jessica in 2009, it upset a lot of people in her Catholic community. She declared on the Los Angeles radio that Jessica was a wonderful woman who should have equal rights. She even went to Jessica's wedding, which infuriated a lot of Mormon conservatives. She was called out, accused her of disobeying her faith, and degraded her. Although her remarks had great impact, they deeply polarized her church and fan following. Silently, too, her body suffered. Marie had suffered severe knee pain after years of performing on stage. She reportedly fell and chipped off a piece of her kneecap while performing in Las Vegas. Injuries accumulated over years. She had many knee surgery in 2015, but she kept them to herself. She simply continued to perform. The pressure to be flawless and never display weakness was so great. However, in her 2001 book, she revealed her darkest secret. She disclosed that during her teenage years in the 1970s, she had experienced sexual abuse. The perpetrator was a member of her professional network, not a friend or relative. She claimed that she lived in fear and felt intimidated. It altered her self-perception. She claimed that due to the severe trauma, she began to believe that she was gay since guys made her feel ill. She battled self-worth and body image for years. One of the main causes of her difficult later years was the abuse. She eventually talked about the body shaming she experienced at the age of 15 in 2023. She was 5'5" and weighed 103 pounds. But a producer pulled her into a parking lot at KTLA and told her she was fat and an embarrassment. It crushed her. From that point on, she started starving herself before tapings, terrified of looking wrong. That humiliation stayed with her for decades and added to her battles with body dysmorphia. Then in March 2024, she appeared on a podcast with Kate Hudson and Oliver Hudson. But instead of talking about her childhood, people focused only on her face. She was 64, but many said she looked like a completely different person. Some accused her of going too far with plastic surgery. Side-by-side pictures from the 1970s and 2024 went viral. The internet was brutal. People called her an imposter and flooded her pages with hurtful comments. It didn't stop there. In 2025, Marie finally responded. She admitted she had Botox and laser treatments, and she had breast reduction surgery for back pain. But she denied getting major surgeries like a facelift. Even so, experts looked at her photos and said there were clear changes in her jawline and neck. In one 2022 video promoting Nutrisystem, her skin looked much tighter than expected. The pressure to always look young had taken over the conversation, and it made Marie feel like people forgot who she really was. By April 2025, she had enough. She announced on Instagram that she was stepping away from social media to focus on her family. She had already been offline for 9 months. She said the criticism over her looks and her past had worn her down. At 65, she just wanted peace. She said she had always tried to listen to her heart. And now her heart was telling her to unplug and be with the people who truly matter. After so much loss, pain, and judgment, Marie was finally choosing to protect herself.